Hey guys, what's up? Scoundrel here, and today I'm going to be talking to you about Alpha. Now, I'm not going to take the credit for this guide. A lot of the work was done by a guy called Itachi19 Vg. Wonderful guy, really good player. I'm going to link his YouTube in the description and at the end of the video. Now, Alpha is an interesting hero. She's a bit like Blackfeather in the sense that she's very good single target lockdown. She's very much a bruiser assassin, so maybe not as high damage output as Taka and Koshka, but will survive longer in teamfights for the most part. So she's really good in that respect. The problem is that she can't do things like peel like Cruel can. She's really just all in damage, and that's practically all that she brings to the table. Now let's look at her skills first. Her heroic perk is Infinite Reboot. This is essentially her second life. You get reserve health when you take lethal damage. It's based on your max energy and your level, and you regenerate that over 4.5 seconds. If they don't kill you, you'll come back to life with a good amount of health in reserve. And that can also be made quicker with energy regen. So things like Void Battery will make your reboot that much quicker. Her A ability is called Prime Directive, and this is Alpha's gap closing ability. It deals damage in a 4.5 meter radius in the area that Alpha ends up at, so your target area, that's where the damage will be dealt. It has both the crystal power and weapon power ratio, and it deals a slow, so a 1.5 second scaling slow that gets better with the more levels that you have in Prime Directive. The slow duration will always stay the same, but the slow intensity will increase. It also gets increasing damage based on the core overload charge that you have. So the more core overload charges you'll have, the more damage that Prime Directive will do on impact, and we'll talk about that later on. Her B ability is called Core Charge, and it has a both 100% crystal power and 100% weapon power ratio scaling. It is an empowered basic attack, meaning it will land on hit effects as well as landing your basic attack damage too, and the cooldown of it is reduced by 1 second every time you use a basic attack. It costs 2.5% of your current health to cast and generates a stack of core overload. Now, this is a debuff and a buff that stacks up to 3 times on Alpha after using the ability, meaning that the health cost of the ability goes up by 2.5% each time, all the way up to 10%. However, there are good parts to the buff. Basic attacks will heal for the duration of the buff, and it will also increase the ability damage of Prime Directive and Core Charge itself. Alpha's C ability is called Termination Protocol, and she literally just blows herself up. No, but seriously, there's a little bit more to the ability as well. When you activate it, you get a barrier based on your level and a little bit of movement speed going forwards. However, that movement speed decays fairly rapidly as she approaches the 3-second period, which is when you'll essentially blow yourself up. If the barrier is destroyed, she will also blow up as well. So you need to make sure that you're within 4.5 meters to an enemy that you want to hit with this ability, because this is also lethal to Alpha herself. You need to have your passive Infinite Reboot available to be able to use this ability. You can't just blow yourself up randomly. Increasing the level of this decreases the cooldown on her passive Infinite Reboot, so the more levels you put into C, the quicker you're going to be able to come back to life once having your heroic perk procced. Now, I will talk about tips and tricks with those abilities later on, but now we're going to talk about Alpha's build paths. She can be built both crystal power and weapon power. However, the most popular right now, and probably the best version, is the crystal power build, which I'll go over first, and then I think weapon power will be more of a side note at the end. This is the first skill build path that you should consider with Crystal Power Alpha. You take your Core Charge first because it gives you better damage dueling potential at level 1 as well as better clear in the jungle. But then you max Prime Directive because when you overdrive it, you get a range increase on it, as well as the damage is just insane. So this is the better maxing, as well as you get more damage from the ultimate if you give it 3 points as opposed to your Core Charge, but you have to be confident in hitting your ultimate. So if you're not confident in hitting your ultimate, you do have this version, which is where you still max Prime Directive first, but then you overdrive Core Charge. Now, when you overdrive Core Charge, basic attacks reduces cooldown slightly more quickly. It's about 0.2 seconds more quickly, and you get more increase damage per stack of core overload that you have. But again, only do this if you're not so confident in hitting your ultimate. It's probably more consistent and safer, but if you can land that ultimate and you get it at level 3, you can pretty much one-shot carries. So those are the two options that you have in terms of ability paths. Now we've looked at abilities, it's time to look at items. Now starting items with Alpha, especially down the Crystal Power build path, I would start with a Crystal Bit, a Swift Shooter, and a Halcyon Potion. Why Swift Shooter? Well, it helps reset the cooldown of Core Charge more quickly, and that's a lot of damage, especially at level 1 and 2. Now, on first back, I definitely want to make sure I'm picking up some resistances and picking up boots, because Alpha is not mobile. Despite having Prime Directive, it relies on a target to hit. She's not like Rona or Glaive, who have got those kind of escapes in the early game, you know, like Afterburn and into the fray. So she needs to be able to survive if she gets caught in a skirmish in the enemy jungle or in an early game team fight, and that's where resistances are very helpful because, like we said, doesn't have the mobility to escape by herself. Now, big first items, that's a question that it can be asked here of Alpha, but the most obvious is Aftershock. It synergizes with Core Charge, which is a basic attack, so as soon as you activate Core Charge, it will apply Aftershock instantaneously, and, you know, the lifesteal that goes along with your Core Collapse charges is also very nice with the Aftershock too. However, if you are against squishy targets, there is a build path that involves you taking Broken Myth first, just being able to stack those easily with Core Charge and then blow up squishies with your Prime Directive when possible. And when we're talking about defensive items, it's very important to pick up an Atlas Pauldrons on Alpha. No point to go Full Metal Jacket really, because you have that ability to lock down targets, and against melee and ranged weapon power carries, having the Atlas Pauldrons are just too powerful. Now, looking at her total item build, this is a standard item build I would suggest in almost every situation. We've talked about the Aftershock, then getting the Broken Myth on top of that is fantastic, just because, you know, that is going to increase her damage no end with the ability to stack very easily with Core Charge. And Eve of Harvest is pretty good against double melee, or just if you need the extra reboot reduction in terms of time. So remember, Eve of Harvest will allow yourself to regenerate after having your passive procced more quickly, as will Halcyon Charges. That's what Halcyon Charges will do here instead of Journey Boots. If you don't want the mobility, which I would suggest Journey Boots are best on Alpha, but if you want to be able to reboot quicker, then going Halcyon Charges is very, very good. War Treads if you just want to be more tanky, and remember they're more of a team item too, so speeds everybody up, which is great if you want someone to follow up on your Prime Directive when looking for an engage. There are changes you can make, however, to the Crystal Power item build path. You can change the Eve of Harvest for a Shatterglass, great against super squishy targets. You just want to be able to blow them up more easily, especially with the great scaling that you've got on your Prime Directive and your ultimate. You can change to Alternating Current if you're going to be in a more sustained type battle. Remember, basic attacks reduce the cooldown of Core Charge, and your basic attacks will then do Crystal Power damage too. And there is a world where you could potentially go Clockwork if you want that cooldown reduction. I wouldn't suggest it though. I think if you're going to go Clockwork, just going Shatterglass is better, but the option is always there. This is the build path if you go Broken Myth first. Remember, boots are still interchangeable and the like. This is basically there specifically to blow up squishies, and this is where Clockwork does become useful. It synergizes with the Shatterglass and the Broken Myth very well, and the cooldown reduction will help you use Prime Directive more often. And lastly, we talked about the importance of Atlas Pauldrons because of the threat of a weapon power carry, for instance. If you're going up against a Ringo, having Atlas Pauldrons is very good because you can get onto him instantly with Prime Directive, and then you can use Atlas Pauldrons as you land on him, so you get an instant slow attack speed on the weapon power carry, making him a lot easier to take out and a much less of a threat. The other instance is having a reflex block in Alpha, and because we talked about Alpha having low mobility, having a reflex block is very important. If you get caught in some sort of stun, not being able to block it by not having a reflex block could mean the end of your team fight. Remember, Alpha has Prime Directive, and that is it. That's the only real gap closing ability that she's got. She has got Core Charge, but it's a shorter range. You have to be close to your target regardless to use it. So having a reflex block is super important about maintaining your ability to stick to a target and try and get through those stuns that could get in your way. So now we've looked at the Crystal Power build. Let's have a quick look at the Weapon Power build. The ability build path is slightly different because you're going to be maxing B instead of A this time round, because it synergizes really well with Weapon Power. It's an empowered basic attack, essentially. So you'll be doing more and more damage with that as the game goes on. Then you will overdrive A second, because you want that extra range on the engage from the Prime Directive. And honestly, you don't really need to worry about C, because essentially all you use it for as Weapon Power is a last-ditch attempt to survive, as opposed to doing any meaningful damage with it. Because you'll just do more damage basic attacking than you will trying to use your ultimate if you're not going any Crystal Power. Now, if you've watched my guides before, you'll know that the standard Weapon Power star applies here for Alpha as well. Swift Shooter helping out with the cooldown reduction on your Core Charge too. And we're going to skip straight to the end build here, get straight into the meat. Now, again, this is pretty simple. You probably see this on most weapon power builds. You have the Atlas Pauldrons on Alpha instead of the Full Metal Jacket, obviously, because it's easy to get to the backline to proc the Atlas Pauldrons with the Prime Directive, and it's very good against melee weapon power carries as well. All of the boots are interchangeable again, and the biggest change that you can make in this build is if you're going up against a lot of armor, get rid of the Tyrant's Monocle and go for a Bonesaw. Very simple, very clean cut, and that is Weapon Power Alpha in a nutshell. Next, I'm going to show you some tips and tricks that I'll be using the clips that Itachi provided me to illustrate. Big thanks to him, by the way. Go and check out his YouTube channel in the description. First one is using neutral objectives and turrets to your advantage with Prime Directive. Now, Itachi is chasing down the glaive here. He can't use Prime Directive directly on glaive because he is just too far out of range. So what he's going to do is he's going to use it on the gold miner. Prime Directive puts you behind the target that you try to apply it to, and he'll deal the damage to glaive, and he will kill glaive in the process of the core charge following. So that's one of the tips and tricks. Remember to use Prime Directive on targets that aren't just heroes. You can use them on neutral objectives to climb over wolves, and you can use them on turrets too. The second tip and trick is if you use your ultimate and it goes wrong and you want to survive, try and put yourself in a brush. Watch Itachi here. He jumps into the brush knowing that he's not going to be able to survive following his Prime Directive, and eventually, because there is no vision for the blue side, they will lose vision, so they won't be able to basic attack him down, and that will give him much needed seconds to be able to regenerate and come back fighting. And watch what happens next. Spotless is going to move in, he's lost vision, Itachi gets the kill, and look at him use the turret again with the Prime Directive. He's going to use the Prime Directive on the turret, he is actually going to land the damage onto Ezreal. Look at this, straight over, one more core charge, and he cleans up by himself. Alpha did that by herself in that clip. And that's, again, using those two tips that we just talked about. If your ultimate goes wrong, try and get into a brush because they might not have vision and it could give you crucial seconds. And using your Prime Directive on turrets and neutral objectives to secure kills. The next tip that I want to talk about is using your movement gap closing abilities whilst having your ultimate channeling. You have 3 seconds to get to the location that you want to get to, and remember, movement speed decays when you're using your ultimate to a complete standstill when you blow up, so you need to use your core charge and your Prime Directive to find your targets. And this is what you're going to see from Itachi in this next clip. He's going to start to move away, and as he charges his ultimate, he's going to go immediately back in with Prime Directive and Core Charge to get a double kill. Because he used those 2 gap closing abilities whilst the ultimate was channeling, it didn't mean that he got locked down. And you'll see he does a nifty little use of that turret dive using the Prime Directive on turret again to help pick up the clean sweep and ace of the enemy team. The final tip I want to talk to you about is using your core charge to stack your core overload all the way up to 3 before searching for an engage. In this specific clip, you can see that Itachi is stacking it on jungle camps before searching for a Prime Directive. Now remember, 3 stacks of core overload will max that damage coming out from the Prime Directive, and it can be devastating on impact. You can also do this on lane minions before searching for an engage in the lane too. Just take a look at Itachi now, landing a massive Prime Directive because he has max stacks of that core overload. Also, core overload has a 5-second period where it exists for. Don't feel like you have to rush your Prime Directive because of the timer. During that Prime Directive animation, the actual core overload stacks will halt their timer, so that A, allows you to aim and not feel so pressured with your Prime Directive, but also B, that when you actually get delivered to the enemy, if you hit Prime Directive, you can use a core charge immediately to maintain your stacks and therefore maintain your damage in the middle of a team fight. Really nifty little trick to hang on to, but do remember, before searching for an engage, especially if you are not pressured, make sure you're building those core overload stacks. While they will cost you health to use your core charge, the damage output from core charge and Prime Directive is insanely worth it. So it's one of the main things I think a lot of alpha players do forget to do. And remember, if you land Prime Directive, it gets rid of all of the negative effects of core overload. So make sure you land your Prime Directive, guys. So let's go over the tips and tricks that we've just talked about as just kind of a roundup towards the end of this video. Remember to use Prime Directive on turrets and neutral creeps to lock down enemies. You can use it to kind of catch them off guard. You appear behind your target, and if the enemy feels safe hiding behind their turret, you can use it to just absolutely blow them up. Remember to use brushes to help you survive post-ultimate. That vision loss that the enemies receive might actually save your life. Use creeps to stack core overload using your core charge before finding the engage with Prime Directive, especially if you're not pressured. And remember to use Prime Directive and core charge to get your ultimate into the position that you need to at least land on 1 or 2 enemies. Remember, if you use your ultimate and it hits no one, you become a sitting duck. That's one of the drawbacks of Alpha. You can do huge damage, but you do just become a blank target for the enemy if you manage to miss that ability. Now we're going to look at hero matchups just to end up with. This is a super rough guide. Low mobility targets are great for you. You can lock them down really easily. Ranged weapon power carries, because of the Prime Directive Atlas Pauldrons combo, you can deal with very readily too. Ringo, Kestrel, Sky if she's weapon power, Vox as well, Saw to an extent too, all of which are easy to lock down, as well as Saw being such an easy target for your ultimate. The targets that you are going to struggle with are going to be things like Taka and Koshka, because the early invades, they can really put you on a little bit of tilt. Cruel, because of the weakness stacks, he'll provide a real issue to you. Idris can dodge your entire ultimate with his ultimate and can kite you very nicely. Rhyme is a pain for you in the early game. He's a pain against any melee carries. And Rona can be a real struggle too. She's always considered a counter to Alpha. Other heroes that you might struggle with are things like Catherine, or anything that reduces your mobility. Catherine can stun you during Prime Directive, stopping you from getting to your target. Lyra stops your mobility completely, as does Flicker in some ways. Lance, with all of his CC, can be an issue. Anybody that stops you doing what you do best, which is sticking to a singular target, reducing your mobility, is going to be an issue for you in terms of captains or anything else. So, in summary, you're good against static targets with low mobility. You're good against weapon power carries that are ranged, as well as weapon power carries that are melee in some ways, because of your Prime Directive Atlas Pauldrons combo. You're bad against things that reduce your damage, like Cruel, things that reduce your mobility, or are just good against melee carries like Rhyme and Rona. And you're bad against anybody that can put a lot of early aggression in your jungle. Taka and Koshka can be a real pain for you in that respect. And there we have it, another guide. Big thanks again to Itachi, or Itchy. Go and check out his YouTube channel. There'll be a link right at the end of the video here. If you want to see any more guides, let me know. I'm working on some new content. I'm going to be trying getting a laning guide and a vision guide out this week, as well as one more hero guide. I'm going to try and make my release dates Mondays, Wednesdays, and Saturdays for the most part. Mondays and Wednesdays definitely, I think, will be my target here. I might move Saturday to Friday depending on how things go. But yeah, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. You guys watching really means a lot to me, and I really enjoy all the support that you give me, so thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.